PolyTracker is a general-purpose tool created by Trail of Bits for efficiently performing data flow and control flow analysis of programs. It's an LLVM pass that instruments programs to track which bytes of input are operated on by which functions and how they flow out of the program. It outputs runtime artifacts that contain this data flow information, as well as the runtime trace. PolyTracker also provides a Python library for interacting with and analyzing its output, as well as an interactive Python REPL. Programs are complex and opaque. They operate on inputs, perform some computations, and produce an output. But being able to introspect exactly how that input flows through the program and how it affects the output is a very difficult problem and largely unknown. So, for example, a simple popular file format like PDF will typically have myriad parser implementations. For complex and often ambiguously defined file formats like PDF, this can lead to so-called file format schizophrenia. This is when different implementations of the same file format will parse and interpret the same file differently. For example, one parser might crash on the file. Another might reject it as malformed. A third might accept the file as valid. And a fourth might be vulnerable to an exploit embedded in the file. Given a corpus of parser implementations, how can we automatically determine a maximal subset of the file format that is accepted by all of the parser implementations? Alternatively, given a file that exhibits different behavior between the implementations, how can we automatically determine what parts of the file and the parser cause that differential? PolyTracker is a tool for answering these problems. PolyTracker instrumentation will allow us to see how the data flows through the programs and where those differentials occur. So we can see from an input file which byte offsets are operated on by which functions, telling us which functions are responsible for operating on which parts of the input file. The way PolyTracker does this is by operating on the LLVM intermediate representation. This means that virtually any program that can be compiled with LLVM or any binary that can be lifted to LLVM IR can be instrumented through PolyTracker. We have had some experimental support for closed source binaries lifting to LLVM using another Trail of Bits tool called Remil. PolyTracker, to the best of our knowledge, is the most efficient tool for performing so-called universal taint analysis, basically being able to track all data flows throughout the program through its entire execution. It's very efficient, as we'll see in this demonstration. Here we have a instrumented version of the popular MooPDF parser that we already compiled using PolyTracker. And we're running it on this sample blind spots PDF file. And as we can see, PolyTracker ran incredibly quickly and produced this TDAG output file that contains all of the runtime artifacts that then we can analyze for whatever our use case is. So one use case we'd like to talk about is blind spot detection. Blind spots are regions of an input that can be arbitrarily modified without affecting the program's output. So why do we care about blind spots? Well, first of all, they can be used for steganography. Since they don't affect the output or behavior of the program, you can embed whatever data you want in them to send surreptitious messages or perhaps to store malware payloads in files. But blind spots can also be indicative of parser differentials. For example, by analyzing the blind spots within the MooPDF parser, we notice that in almost all contexts, it treats the end of the end OBJ PDF token as a blind spot. So what this means is that you can arbitrarily modify everything that comes after that E in most contexts. We can replace it with X's, and the MoPDF parser will still ingest the PDF and produce or render an output that without even giving you an indication that the PDF may be malformed. This can cause file format schizophrenia because another parser that more strictly adheres to the PDF spec would reject this file or parse it differently if it didn't have the proper end OBJ token. So here's an example of how we extract blind spots from that PolyTracker TDAG file that contains the runtime artifacts from the instrumentation. We run the PolyTracker cavities command, which automatically enumerates the blind spots in the input. And here we can see there are a number of blind spots. Each region of blind spots or contiguous blind spots is listed on a separate line, and those are byte indices within the file. So the next question is, how do we make sense of those blind spots? What do they mean? Where are they in the input file? Well, we can make use of PolyTracker's sibling tool, polyfile, to parse the input file and map its abstract syntax tree onto the blind spots. And that's what we're doing here. We have a script called semantic context, which will take the output of PolyTracker's cavities command and tell us the semantic context of each of the cavities. So here we're giving the specific byte offsets that we're interested in and the original file. And we can immediately see the various parse tree derivations for the locations of the blind spots and see that they are almost all occurring within PDF dictionary key value pairs. So these particular blind spots that we chose to analyze are likely key value pairs that are not important for rendering. So for example, PDF allows arbitrary key value pairs to be included in their dictionaries, even if they don't contribute to rendering. And a lot of PDF distillers and software that produces PDFs uses this to store things like metadata, like the user or timestamps that were, or the version of the software that created the PDF. So here are some high-level results. We ran an analysis over a corpus of PDFs, and we found that 5% of the bytes on average in all of the files are completely ignored. So on average, if you have a PDF, you could store steganographically about 5%, or at least 5% of its file size inside of it without changing its overall file size. We also did an analysis on MP4, the video streaming format, and discovered that it has a significant number of blind spots. Our intuition behind that is that streaming formats, video formats inherently have a lot of data redundancy to account for data loss on the wire. So a lot of this ends up being ignored if the file is being streamed at a high bit rate. Another use case of PolyTracker is in analyzing parser differentials or program differentials, where you'd have one file that behaves differently between two parsers. Here, we are analyzing a so-called Heisenbug. This is another academic term for this is variability analysis. So you have a program that behaves one way when you're debugging it, and another way when you've compiled it before release with optimizations turned on. These are notoriously finicky and difficult to fix. Here with PolyTracker instrumentation on both the variants of the program, we can immediately see the point at which the trace diverges, as well as the last input byte, in this case, input byte offset 756, before the divergence. So we can conclude that whatever is causing this differential is being triggered by byte offset 756 in the input file. So then we can look at the semantic context of that, and a human can immediately triage the situation. PolyTracker is free and open source. It is able to track all input bytes at once, and is the most performant tool for doing so that we are aware of. It can identify which functions operate on which data and automatically detect blind spots in inputs. As a number of use cases, can be used for differential analysis, and several universities are currently investigating using it for various program analysis tasks and vulnerability research tasks. It is available right now on GitHub with documentation on how to get started.